Dr. Christopher West here, the Theology of the Body Guy. In this video, we're going to take a look at the original meaning of the word gender and how contraceptive technology and its widespread embrace has led to the eclipse of that meaning. Let's take a look. We're continuing our series looking at questions from my book, Good News About Sex and Marriage, Answers to Your Honest Questions About Catholic Teaching. We're looking at questions now from chapter 9, which is called Trapped in the Wrong Body, ? And what we want to do in this video is look at the origin of the word gender. My brothers and sisters, we live in a world that is redefining some of the most important words in our language. I urge you to become an etymologist, not to be confused with entomology, which is the study of insects. Fine and good if you're into that. But etymology is the study of the origin of words. And we can do a lot to cast out the gender confusion by looking at the origin of that word. Where does it come from? Gender shares the same root as words like generous, generate, genesis, progeny, genealogy, genetics. That Greek root gen means to produce or give birth to. When we understand that, we recognize that the word gender means the manner in which you generate new life. And when we understand that, we understand that gender is determined by another gen word, your genitals. Your genitals determine the manner in which you generate new life, which is to say your genitals determine your gender. We'll look in future videos, we'll look at those rare cases in which someone could be born with ambiguous genitalia. We'll set that aside for now. But let's just recognize there are only two ways of generating new life, with sperm or with eggs. The male gender's genitals generate the next generation with sperm. The female gender's genitals generate the next generation with ova. And notice you need the sperm and the ova to come together to generate the next generation. We used to call this the facts of life. But in the modern world, the facts of life are entirely up for grabs. How did we get here? All right, let's dive in a little deeper. When a culture understands and reverences the meaning of our genitals, the call to generate the next generation, that culture will understand and reverence the meaning of gender. Attack the meaning of our genitals, and an attack on the meaning of gender is inevitable. Stated another way, once a culture starts draining sexual activity of its meaning, it's only a matter of time before that culture starts draining sexual identity of its meaning. The two stand or fall together. Hence, it shouldn't surprise us at all that yesterday's sexual ideology, which was all about rupturing gender from life. In other words, we began with a contraceptive revolution that sought to rupture our gender from its ability to generate new life, right? That was what you could call contraceptive and abortion politics. This has led to today's gender ideology, which is all about rupturing life itself from gender, with today's identity politics. So let's say it again. Yesterday's sexual ideology, which was all about rupturing gender from life, has ended in today's gender ideology, which is all about rupturing life from gender. As soon as you embrace the idea that we can willfully render our genitals unable to generate, it's only a matter of time before the meaning of gender itself is eclipsed. What are we doing when we render our genitals unable to generate? We are neutering our humanity. It shouldn't surprise us at all that eventually that's going to lead to what? The neutering of our humanity, the complete erasing from consciousness of the very purpose and meaning of the gender distinction itself. And this is where the sexual revolution has led us. Now, I go on to say, of course, that this is not to assume that prior to the sexual revolution, we had a wonderfully balanced understanding of gender. No, without a doubt, a correction of socially constructed gender roles that exaggerated the sexual difference, almost always in favor of men, was sorely needed. But in the process, it seems we have forgotten that there are two roles, one belonging only to men and one belonging only to women, that are in no way fabricated by society. They are indeed ordained by God, given in nature, and they just so happen to be absolutely indispensable for the survival of the human race itself. What are we talking about here? We're talking about fathering and mothering a child through the generative act, which is made possible precisely by the fact that we are gendered creatures. Male and female, he created them, and he blessed them, and he said, be fruitful. In other words, generate the next generation with your genitals. That's what determines your gender. This is the only coherent way in which to classify and understand the natural purpose of the sexual difference. Men and women, as I've said in previous videos, are literally organized for one another. That means we have the genital organs that enable us to become one organism generating the next generation. Until the disorganizing impact of modern contraceptive technology intervened, society as a whole naturally organized itself around this fundamental truth. While people have always bucked this organizing principle that the genital act leads to the generation of the next generation, nonetheless, the regulating effect of fertility naturally kept such movements on the fringes of society. Today, of course, new gender ideologies, which are more aptly genderless ideologies, have gone mainstream. Indeed, introduce effective contraception on a wide scale and eventually the fundamental link among gender, genitals, and generating, indeed the very facts of life. They vanish from the way we understand our genital relationships and our gender identities. St. Paul VI, author of Humanae Vitae, which in 1968, when it came out, reaffirmed the church's constant teaching on the immorality of contraception. He predicted that a contracepting world not only becomes a world of rampant sexual infidelity, it also becomes a world in which women and childbearing are degraded. It becomes a world in which governments trample on the rights and needs of the family. And he also warned that it would become a world in which human beings believe they can manipulate their bodies at will. This is the world we live in today. The gender chaos and confusion we are embracing today as normal is only possible because we are viewing the world through what you might call condom-colored glasses. Pope Benedict XVI, long before he became Pope, this was in 1984, said this: "We will atone in our day for the consequences of a sexuality which is no longer linked to procreation. It logically follows from this that every form of genital activity becomes equivalent. No longer having an objective reason to justify it, namely the generation of the next generation, sex seeks the subjective reason for justification in the gratification of one's own personal desire, and in the most satisfying way for that individual. In turn, he observed that everyone becomes free to give to his personal libido the content considered suitable for himself. In other words, we come to define what sex is all about. When we remove what God made sex to be all about, the union of man and woman for the generation of the next generation, then we define what sex is all about. My own personal pleasure, right? Hence, he says, this is all, again, Pope Benedict XVI, before he became Pope in 1984. Hence, he says, it naturally follows that all forms of sexual gratification are transformed into the rights of the individual once society has embraced the contraceptive mentality. From there, he concluded, that people will end up demanding the right of escaping what they will come to consider the slavery of nature, and they will demand the right to be male or female at one's own will or pleasure. Wow. What did these popes see in ages past, in decades past? It's not even ages, it's not a long time ago. In decades past, these two men saw that by embracing contraception, we are blinding ourselves to the natural purpose and meaning of the sex distinction itself. And eventually we will be blind to the very meaning of being male and female. And this is very dangerous for us because the future of civilization depends on men and women living out the truth of their creation as men and women. There's no future if we don't live the sex distinction properly as a call to holy communion for the sake of bringing new life into the world. Lord, open our eyes to who we really are. My brothers and sisters, there's so much more to say here, so much more to unpack for you. And I do in the courses I teach for the Theology of the Body Institute and in the ongoing formation I offer through our patron community. Check out the links below to learn more about those opportunities. And until our next time together, may your eyes and may mine be opened wider and wider to the glory and the splendor revealed through our bodies as male and female.